The buzzards were already circling when Ethan Vance spotted the figure lying motionless in the sand, half buried beneath the unforgiving Arizona sun of 1876. He had been tracking a stolen mare for 3 days across the Sonoran Desert, his weathered face protected by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, when something made him pause. The circling birds caught his attention first, their dark wings cutting lazy circles against the blazing sky. Then he saw her, a crumpled form in what had once been a traveling dress, now torn and dust-covered, lying perfectly still about 50 yards from the rocky outcropping where he had stopped to rest his horse. Ethan urged his stallion forward, his heart hammering in his chest as he approached. Most men would have kept riding, unwilling to involve themselves in whatever tragedy had befallen this soul. But Ethan Vance had never been most men. His father had raised him to believe that decency mattered, even out here where the law was just a distant suggestion, and survival meant looking out for yourself first. When he reached her, he swung down from his saddle and knelt beside the woman. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with long dark hair matted with sand and blood. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her skin sunburned to an angry red. But when he pressed his fingers to her throat, he felt it a faint, thready pulse that told him she was still fighting to stay alive. "Easy now," he murmured, though she showed no sign of hearing him. Her eyes remained closed, her breathing so shallow he could barely detect the rise and fall of her chest. Ethan moved quickly, years of living rough having taught him how to handle emergencies. He retrieved his canteen from his saddle and carefully tilted her head back, dribbling water onto her cracked lips. She did not respond at first, but then her throat convulsed weakly as some of the precious liquid trickled into her mouth. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, shimmering with heat waves that made the horizon dance and blur. He knew she would not survive another hour in this exposure. Working swiftly, Ethan untied his bedroll and stretched it between 2 sturdy pieces of driftwood he drove into the sand, creating a makeshift shelter that cast a blessed shadow over her body. It was not much, but it would have to do until he could move her. As he worked, he studied her more carefully. Her dress, though ruined now, had once been fine quality, the kind of garment a woman of means would wear for traveling. There were no bags, no horse, no supplies anywhere near her. Someone had left her here deliberately, abandoning her to die in the most brutal way imaginable. Rage kindled in his chest, hot and fierce. What kind of monster would do this to a woman? He gave her more water, small sips at a time, and was rewarded when her eyelids finally fluttered. Her eyes, when they opened, were the color of warm honey, though glazed with pain and confusion. She stared at him without comprehension, her lips moving soundlessly. "You are safe now," Ethan said quietly, keeping his voice low and calm. "I've got you. Just rest." Her eyes focused on him for a moment, and he saw fear flash across her face. Then her gaze shifted to the canteen in his hand, and that fear transformed into desperate need. She tried to reach for it, her movements weak and uncoordinated. "Slow," he cautioned, supporting her head as he brought the canteen to her lips again. "Too much at once will make you sick." She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, and he had to pull the canteen away despite her wordless protest. "I know," he said gently, "but trust me." A little at a time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, raw and broken. "They left me." "Who left you?" Her eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion overtaking her. Ethan did not press for answers. There would be time for that later if she survived. Right now, he needed to get her somewhere safe, somewhere she could recover. The nearest town was Wickenburg, a rough mining settlement about 20 miles to the northeast. It was not much, just a collection of buildings clustered around a few productive gold claims, but it had a doctor and a boarding house where she could rest. Ethan made the decision quickly. He dampened his spare shirt with water and laid it gently across her sunburned face and neck, then carefully lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body frighteningly light against his chest. He settled into his saddle with her cradled against him, adjusting her position so her head rested against his shoulder. His horse, a steady gelding named Copper, shifted beneath the extra weight but did not protest. The ride to Wickenburg was the longest 20 miles Ethan had ever traveled. He kept the pace slow and steady, stopping every hour to give the woman more water and to check on her condition. Sometimes she was conscious, her honey-colored eyes watching him with a mixture of wariness and gratitude. Other times she drifted into fevered sleep, murmuring words he could not quite make out. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold, she stirred against him and spoke more clearly. "Olivia," she whispered. "What was that, my name?" "Olivia Calloway." "Ethan Vance," he replied, shifting his grip on the reins to hold her more securely. "We are almost to town, Miss Calloway. Just hold on a little longer." "Why did you help me?" Her voice was stronger now, though still rough with thirst and pain. Ethan considered the question. "Because leaving you there was not something I could do. Most men would have. Then most men are fools." He felt rather than saw her smile a small movement against his chest. Then she said something that made his heart clench. "They took everything. My uncle and his men. They killed my father, took our money and left me in the desert to die." Ethan's jaw tightened, fury washing through him in a cold wave. "Your own uncle. He wanted my father's ranch. We were traveling to sell some cattle in Phoenix when they ambushed us. I thought he was coming to help, but instead—" Her voice trailed off, thick with grief and betrayal. "You do not have to talk about it now," Ethan said quietly. "I need to. I need someone to know in case." She took a shuddering breath. "In case I do not make it." "You will make it," Ethan said firmly. "I give you my word." Wickenburg appeared on the horizon just as the last light was fading from the sky. The town was exactly as rough as Ethan remembered, a collection of weathered buildings flanking a dusty main street. Lamplight glowed in a few windows, and he could hear the tinny sound of a piano playing in the saloon. He rode directly to the boarding house, a sturdy 2-story structure run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. The older woman took one look at Olivia's condition and immediately took charge, clearing a room and sending her son to fetch the doctor. Ethan carried Olivia upstairs and laid her gently on the bed. Mrs. Patterson shooed him out, insisting that she would tend to the young woman's immediate needs. He retreated to the hallway, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. It had been a long day, and the weight of what he had found in the desert pressed heavily on him. Doctor Raymond arrived within the hour, a competent man in his 50s who examined Olivia thoroughly before emerging from the room with a cautiously optimistic expression. "She will live," he told Ethan, who had been pacing the hallway like a caged animal. "Another few hours in that sun and it would have been a different story, but you got her here in time. She is severely dehydrated and suffering from sun exposure, but with rest and care, she should recover fully." Relief flooded through Ethan so powerfully, it nearly buckled his knees. "Thank you, Doctor. You are the one who deserves thanks, Mr. Vance. That young woman owes you her life." After the doctor left, Mrs. Patterson brought Ethan a plate of food and insisted he eat. He did so mechanically, his thoughts on the woman lying in the room down the hall. Her story haunted him. An uncle who would murder his own brother and leave his niece to die was the worst kind of evil, the kind that festered in men who valued gold more than blood. Late that night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat in a chair outside Olivia's room. Mrs. Patterson had allowed him to keep vigil, understanding somehow that he needed to be near to know that she was truly safe. Around midnight, he heard movement from inside the room, and then Olivia's voice, weak but clear. "Mr. Vance, are you out there?" He opened the door quietly and stepped inside. The lamp was turned low, casting soft shadows across the room. Olivia was propped up on pillows, her face still red and raw from the sun, but her eyes clear and focused. "How are you feeling?" he asked, moving to stand beside the bed. "Like I was left to die in the desert," she said, and there was a hint of dry humor in her voice that surprised him. "But better than I have any right to feel, thanks to you. I am glad to see you awake." Olivia studied him in the dim light, really looking at him for the first time. She saw a man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a striking blue, the kind that seemed to see too much, and there was a quiet strength in the set of his shoulders. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, an honesty in his face that made her want to trust him. "Tell me what happened," Ethan said gently, pulling a chair close to the bed. "If you feel up to it." Olivia nodded slowly and began to speak. The story poured out of her, all the pain and betrayal she had been holding inside. She told him about her father, Thomas Calloway, who had built a successful ranch outside of Tucson over 20 years of hard work. She spoke of her mother's death when Olivia was just 15, and how her father had never quite recovered from the loss. And she told him about Robert Calloway, her father's younger brother, who had shown up 6 months ago claiming to want to reconnect with family. "Father was so happy to see him," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "He welcomed Uncle Robert with open arms, gave him a job on the ranch, treated him like the brother he had been missing all those years. We had no idea he was planning everything, waiting for the right moment." The ambush had happened 3 days ago. Thomas Calloway had decided to drive a small herd to Phoenix personally, wanting to secure the best price. Robert had volunteered to come along with 2 of his men, ostensibly to help. They had made camp the first night without incident, but on the second day, as they passed through a narrow canyon, Robert's men had drawn their guns. "Father tried to reason with him," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He said Robert could have half of everything if he just asked. But Uncle Robert laughed and said why should he settle for half when he could have it all? Then he shot him. Just shot him down like he was nothing." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "And then they argued about what to do with me. One of the men wanted to shoot me too, but Uncle Robert said no, that it would look suspicious if we both disappeared. He said the desert would do their work for them, and it would look like we were attacked by raiders. So they tied me up, took me into the middle of nowhere, and left me with nothing. Not even water." The cruelty of it was staggering. Ethan had seen plenty of hard men in his years, men who would kill over a poker game or a perceived slight, but this calculated murder of family struck him as particularly vile. "Your uncle made a mistake," Ethan said quietly. "What do you mean?" "He left you alive, and now you can testify against him." Olivia shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Who would believe me? He is probably back at the ranch right now, spinning some story about how raiders killed us both and he barely escaped. He has the deed to the property. Father kept it in his saddlebag, and they took everything. Without proof, without witnesses, it is just my word against his." "Then we will find proof," Ethan said with quiet determination, "and we will make sure your father gets justice." She looked at him with something like wonder in her eyes. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because no man should be able to murder his brother and profit from it. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Olivia felt it like a physical thing, warm and real, and it frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded and stood. "Get some rest, Miss Calloway. We will talk more in the morning." But sleep did not come easily for either of them that night. Ethan lay on the narrow bed in his rented room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about golden eyes and a woman's courage in the face of unimaginable betrayal. And down the hall, Olivia Calloway found herself thinking not about her father's murder or her uncle's treachery, but about the blue-eyed cowboy who had saved her life. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery. Olivia's strength returned gradually, aided by Mrs. Patterson's excellent cooking and Dr. Raymond's attentive care. Ethan remained in Wickenburg, ostensibly to rest his horse and resupply, but in truth because he could not bring himself to leave until he knew Olivia was truly well. They fell into an easy routine. Each morning, Ethan would knock on her door, and if she was awake, they would talk. At first, the conversations were practical, focused on what to do about Robert Calloway and how to prove his guilt. But gradually, they began to share more personal things. Olivia told him about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about her dreams of someday seeing the ocean. Ethan spoke of his own childhood in Texas, of losing his parents to cholera when he was 18, of the years he had spent drifting from place to place, working as a ranch hand, a trail guide, whatever job would pay. "You ever want to settle down?" Olivia asked him one afternoon as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the traffic on the main street. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think I did, but every time I would start to put down roots somewhere, something would happen and I would move on. After a while, I figured maybe I was just meant to keep moving." "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice made her heart ache. On the 5th day after Olivia's rescue, Ethan made a decision. He found her in the small parlor off the main room, reading a book Mrs. Patterson had lent her. She looked up when he entered, and the smile that lit her face sent warmth spreading through his chest. "I am going to Tucson," he announced without preamble. Olivia's smile faded, replaced by alarm. "What? Why?" "To talk to the law there. To find out what story your uncle has been telling and to start building a case against him." "Ethan, no, it is too dangerous. If Robert finds out you are asking questions, he will not," Ethan interrupted gently. "I will be careful, but we need to know what we are up against, Olivia. Sitting here wondering is not going to bring your father justice." She stood, crossing to where he stood near the window. They were close now, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap Mrs. Patterson had given her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her honey-colored eyes. "I cannot lose you too," she said quietly, and the admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and he felt her tremble beneath his touch. "You will not lose me," he promised. "I will come back, I swear it." Olivia covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "Then I am coming with you." "Olivia, no arguments," she said firmly, and he saw the steel in her spine that had kept her alive in the desert. "It is my father who was murdered, my ranch that was stolen. I have a right to face this, to be part of bringing Robert to justice. And besides," she added with a ghost of a smile, "you will need me. I know the ranch, know the workers, know who might be willing to testify against my uncle if they are given protection." Ethan knew he should argue, should insist that she stay here where she was safe. But looking into her eyes, Seeing the determination there mixed with grief and anger and something else he was afraid to name, he found he could not deny her. "All right," he said. "We will go together, but we do this smart and careful. Your uncle thinks you are dead. That is our advantage, and we need to keep it that way until we are ready to move against him." They left Wickenburg 2 days later, both mounted on good horses that Ethan purchased with what remained of his savings. The journey to Tucson would take nearly a week if they traveled at a reasonable pace, camping along the way. Mrs. Patterson packed them enough provisions for the trip and made Olivia promise to write once they had settled matters. The desert was beautiful in the early autumn of 1876, the brutal summer heat giving way to cooler days and cold nights. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, stopping frequently to rest the horses and stretch their legs. At night, they made camp under stars so bright and numerous they seemed to blanket the sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. On the third night, as they sat by the fire after eating a simple meal of beans and hardtack, Olivia finally spoke about her father in detail. She told Ethan about his kindness, his love of the land, his fierce protectiveness of her after her mother died. She cried as she talked, and Ethan moved to sit beside her, pulling her gently into his arms. She went stiff for a moment, then relaxed against him, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin. He held her while she wept, offering no words because there were no words that could ease this kind of pain. All he could do was be there, solid and warm and real. When her tears finally subsided, Olivia pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy from crying, but to Ethan, she had never been more beautiful. There was something raw and honest in this moment, a vulnerability she was trusting him with. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for believing me, for being here." "Olivia," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I am falling in love with you." The words hung between them, and for a moment, Ethan feared he had made a terrible mistake. But then Olivia smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good," she said simply, "because I am falling in love with you too." He kissed her then, gently at first, mindful of her still healing lips. But she pressed closer, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something that made his heart race and his blood sing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should not rush this," he said, though every fiber of his being wanted to pull her close again. "You have been through so much, and I do not want you to confuse gratitude with—" Olivia silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Do not," she said firmly. "Do not tell me what I feel. I know the difference between gratitude and love, Ethan Vance. I have been falling for you since that first night in Wickenburg, when you sat outside my door all night to make sure I was safe. This is not confusion or trauma or anything else. This is real." Ethan captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Then when this is over, when your father has justice and your uncle is behind bars, I am going to court you properly. I am going to ask you to marry me and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." "I already know my answer," Olivia said, her eyes shining with tears that were no longer just from grief. They held each other long into the night, talking quietly about the future they hoped to build together. Olivia spoke of her desire to keep the ranch running, to honor her father's legacy by making it thrive. Ethan confessed his long-buried dream of having land to call his own, a place to build a life instead of endlessly drifting. They imagined children eventually, a house filled with laughter and love, the kind of family neither of them had anymore. But first, there was justice to be served. They reached the outskirts of Tucson late in the afternoon of their 7th day of travel. The city was larger than Wickenburg, a bustling hub of mining and ranching commerce. Ethan insisted they find a place to stay before doing anything else, so they took rooms at a modest hotel on the edge of town, registering under false names to avoid drawing attention. That evening, Ethan went alone to the sheriff's office. He found the lawman, a grizzled man named Sheriff Dawson, preparing to close up for the day. Ethan introduced himself as a drifter who had heard about a tragedy at the Calloway Ranch and was curious about the details. Sheriff Dawson was happy to talk, clearly disturbed by the recent events. According to the sheriff, Robert Calloway had ridden into town 9 days ago with a harrowing tale. He claimed that he and his brother Thomas, along with Thomas's daughter Olivia, had been attacked by Apache raiders while driving cattle to Phoenix. Robert said he had barely escaped with his life, riding hard through the night to get back to civilization. When a posse went out to investigate, they had found evidence of a camp and a struggle, along with bloodstains, but no bodies. Robert Calloway seemed torn up about it, Sheriff Dawson said, shaking his head. Kept saying he should have fought harder, should have saved them. I felt sorry for the man, losing his brother and niece like that. Ethan listened carefully, keeping his expression neutral. What happened to the Calloway Ranch? Well, Robert inherited it, being the only living family. He has been running it since he got back. Why do you ask? Just curious, Ethan said casually. Terrible thing, losing family like that. He left the sheriff's office with his suspicions confirmed. Robert had covered his tracks well, using the threat of Apache raids, a real danger in this territory, to explain away the disappearances. Without bodies and without witnesses, it would be difficult to prove murder, but not impossible. Over the next 3 days, Ethan and Olivia worked carefully to build their case. Olivia used her knowledge of the ranch hands to identify men who might be sympathetic to her cause. There was Juan Martinez, the foreman who had worked for her father for 15 years and who had been conveniently sent on an errand to Phoenix the day of the ambush. There was old Samuel Wright, the cook who had known Olivia since she was a baby. And there was Billy Redmond, a young ranch hand who had questioned some of Robert's decisions and been threatened for his trouble. Ethan approached these men one by one, careful to do so when Robert was elsewhere and when they would not be observed. The reactions were mixed. Juan was overjoyed to learn that Olivia was alive, immediately pledging his support. Samuel wept openly and swore on his mother's grave to help however he could. Billy was angry and eager for revenge, having never trusted Robert Calloway. With their testimony secured, Ethan and Olivia knew they needed something more concrete. They needed to prove that the attack story was a fabrication, and that meant finding the place where Thomas Calloway had actually died. Using Olivia's memory of the journey, they retraced the route her father would have taken toward Phoenix. It took 2 days of searching, but finally, in a narrow canyon about 40 miles from Tucson, they found it. The evidence was still there, overlooked by the sheriff's posse because it was not near the false campsite Robert had set up. They found shell casings that matched the type of guns Robert's men carried, strips of fabric from Olivia's dress caught on rocks, and most damning of all, they found her father's pocket watch, engraved with his initials, lying half buried in the sand. Olivia held the watch with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "He never went anywhere without this," she whispered. "My mother gave it to him on their wedding day." Ethan wrapped his arms around her, letting her grieve. When she had composed herself, she looked up at him with fierce determination. "We have enough now, do we not?" "We do," Ethan confirmed. "It is time to bring the law in." They returned to Tucson and went directly to Sheriff Dawson. At first, the lawman was skeptical, staring at Olivia as if she were a ghost. But as she told her story, supported by Ethan's discoveries and the evidence they had gathered, his expression hardened. "Robert Calloway is going to hang for this," Sheriff Dawson said grimly. "But we need to be smart about how we bring him in. He has 2 men with him who were part of this, and they are all armed and dangerous." A plan was formed. Sheriff Dawson would ride out to the Calloway ranch with a small posse, ostensibly to ask Robert some follow-up questions about the attack. Meanwhile, Olivia and Ethan would wait in town with the evidence, ready to present it if needed. It was not the confrontation Olivia wanted. She longed to face her uncle herself, to see his face when he realized she had survived, but she understood the wisdom of keeping herself safe. The waiting was agony. Olivia paced the hotel room while Ethan tried to keep her calm, promising her that justice was coming. It was late afternoon when they finally heard horses approaching, and they rushed to the window to see Sheriff Dawson and his men riding in with 3 prisoners in chains. Robert Calloway looked haggard and furious, his face twisted with rage. When his eyes landed on Olivia standing in the window, the color drained from his face and his mouth fell open in shock. "No," they heard him shout, his voice carrying up to the 2nd floor. "No, she is dead." "I left her to die." The confession, shouted in front of a dozen witnesses, sealed his fate. The trial was swift by frontier standards, held just 2 weeks later. Olivia testified, her voice steady and clear as she recounted every detail of her father's murder and her own abandonment. The ranch hands testified as well, describing Robert's suspicious behavior and his threats against anyone who questioned him. The physical evidence was presented, and the jury deliberated for less than an hour. Robert Calloway and his 2 accomplices were found guilty of murder and conspiracy. They were sentenced to hang, the execution to take place in 10 days. Olivia did not attend the hanging. She had made her peace with her father's memory in other ways, visiting his grave in the small cemetery outside Tucson and placing wildflowers on the freshly marked plot. Ethan stood beside her, his hand warm and solid in hers as she said her final goodbye. "He would have liked you," Olivia said quietly, staring down at the grave marker. "He always wanted me to find a good man, someone who would treat me as an equal and love me for who I am." "I wish I could have known him," Ethan replied. They stood there for a long time, letting the desert wind whisper around them. When they finally left, Olivia felt lighter, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying for too long. With Robert's execution, the ranch reverted to Olivia as the rightful heir. She and Ethan returned to the property together, and Olivia was moved to tears by the welcome she received. Juan and the other loyal hands had kept things running as best they could, and they cheered when she rode through the gates with Ethan by her side. That night, standing on the porch of the house she had grown up in, Olivia felt Ethan's arms come around her from behind. She leaned back against his solid warmth, looking out over the land her father had loved. "Will you marry me, Olivia Calloway?" Ethan asked, his lips close to her ear. She turned in his arms, her face glowing with joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Juan serving as witness and Samuel cooking a feast for the celebration. Olivia wore a new dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace trim, and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. Ethan wore his best clothes, freshly washed and pressed, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows under the Arizona sun, with the desert stretching endlessly around them and friends bearing witness to their union, Olivia thought about how strange life was. She had come so close to dying in that same desert, left to perish by a man who should have protected her. But instead, the desert had brought her Ethan, had delivered her into the arms of the man who would become her husband, her partner, her love. Their first year of marriage was everything Olivia had dreamed of and more. Ethan proved to be a natural rancher, his years of drifting having taught him skills that were invaluable in running the property. He worked alongside the hands, earning their respect through his competence and his willingness to tackle any job, no matter how dirty or difficult. Under his and Olivia's joint management, the ranch began to thrive in ways it never had before. But it was not all work. Ethan made sure of that. He courted his wife the way he had promised, even after they were married. He would surprise her with wildflowers picked on his morning rides, leave notes for her to find tucked into her saddlebag or under her pillow. On clear nights, they would ride out into the desert together, spreading a blanket under the stars and talking for hours about everything and nothing. Olivia blossomed under this love and attention. The trauma of what she had endured began to heal, the nightmares that had plagued her growing less frequent and less intense. She found joy in running the ranch, in working with the horses she loved, in building this life with Ethan. And she found profound happiness in the small intimacies of marriage, in waking up next to him each morning, in the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. 14 months after their wedding, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. Ethan's face transformed, wonder and joy and a hint of terror all flashing across his features. "A baby," he repeated as if testing the words. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Olivia suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the Arizona heat became oppressive. But Ethan was attentive and protective, sometimes overly so. He insisted she rest more, work less, take care of herself. They argued about it occasionally, Olivia insisting she was not fragile, but she secretly loved his concern. Samuel Thomas Vance was born on a warm spring night in 1878, arriving after 12 hours of labor that left Olivia exhausted but radiantly happy. Ethan held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny perfect features, the small fists waving in the air. "He is beautiful," Ethan whispered. "You are amazing, thank you." Olivia, propped up on pillows with her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, smiled tiredly. "We made him together. He is ours." The name had been chosen carefully. Samuel for the old cook who had stood by Olivia when she needed him, and Thomas for her father, whose memory they wanted to honor. Old Samuel cried when they told him, declaring it the greatest honor of his life. Parenthood suited them both. Ethan was a devoted father, often sneaking away from ranch work to spend time with his son. Olivia would find them together in unexpected places, Ethan showing the baby the horses, pointing out the different types of desert birds, talking to him in a low, steady voice about everything and nothing. Samuel was too young to understand, of course, but he seemed to respond to his father's presence, his little face breaking into gummy smiles whenever Ethan picked him up. When Samuel was 18 months old, Olivia became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier. Their daughter, Emma Grace Vance, was born in the winter of 1879, a tiny thing with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. "Our family is complete," Olivia said, holding Emma while Samuel toddled around the room under Juan's watchful eye. "Ethan, seated beside her on the bed, looked at his wife and children with such profound love it made his chest ache. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he admitted. "When I found you in that desert, I was just trying to save a life. I had no idea I was finding my whole world." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other," she said. "You gave me water and shade when I needed it most, but I think I gave you something too. A place to belong, a reason to stop running." "You gave me everything," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her hair. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his mother did. Emma was more adventurous, always climbing things she should not, exploring places she was not supposed to go. Together, they brought chaos and joy to the ranch house in equal measure. Olivia and Ethan weathered the challenges of ranching life side by side. There were years of drought that tested their resources and their faith. There were cattle diseases and market downturns and all the hundred small disasters that could befall a working ranch. But through it all, they had each other. When Olivia was discouraged, Ethan was there to remind her of how far they had come. When Ethan was overwhelmed, Olivia was his rock, steady and strong. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888 with a party that drew neighbors from 50 miles around. The house was filled with music and laughter, children running wild while the adults danced and reminisced. Juan, now in his 60s but still working the ranch, made a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "To Olivia and Ethan," he said, raising his glass, "who showed us all that love can bloom even in the harshest desert, and that family is not just who you are born to, but who you choose and who chooses you." That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Olivia and Ethan walked out into the desert, hand in hand. They found a spot they both loved, a place where they could see for miles in every direction, and sat down on the sand that was still warm from the day's sun. "Do you ever think about that day?" Olivia asked quietly. "The day you found me." "Every day," Ethan admitted. "I think about how easily I could have missed you. If I had been riding a different route, if I had been an hour earlier or later, if I had not noticed the buzzards. My whole life would be different." "Mine too," Olivia said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I used to have nightmares about the desert, about dying there alone and afraid, but not anymore. Now when I think about the desert, I think about how it brought you to me, about how something so beautiful came from something so terrible." Ethan pulled her close, and they sat there together as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The desert stretched around them in all directions, vast and wild and beautiful, no longer a place of death but a testament to survival, to love, to the idea that even in the harshest circumstances, hope could take root and grow into something extraordinary. As the years continued to pass, that hope manifested in countless ways. Samuel grew into a fine young man, eventually taking on more responsibility at the ranch. He inherited his mother's gift with horses and his father's steady leadership. Emma became a teacher, bringing education to the children of ranching families who lived too far from town for regular schooling. She set up a small schoolhouse on the Vance property, and Olivia and Ethan could not have been prouder. In 1895, when Olivia and Ethan were both in their 40s, they became grandparents for the first time. Samuel married a woman named Clara, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and their son was born that winter. Holding her grandson for the first time, Olivia found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had lived, for the family she and Ethan had built together. "We did good," Ethan said, standing beside her as she rocked the baby. "We did," Olivia agreed. "We really did." They continued to run the ranch together well into their later years, though they gradually handed over more responsibility to Samuel and the younger hands. They remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with each passing year. They were the couple that neighbors pointed to as an example, the ones who had weathered everything life threw at them and come out stronger on the other side. On their 25th anniversary, Ethan commissioned a headstone to be placed at the spot where he had found Olivia all those years ago. It was not for a grave, but rather a memorial, a marker of the place where their story had truly begun. The inscription reads simply, "Here, love was born from mercy. Here, two souls found each other in the wilderness." They rode out to see it together on a clear autumn day, much like the day they had met. Standing there, Olivia felt the weight of all the years between that terrible moment and this peaceful one. She thought about the girl she had been, left to die by someone she should have been able to trust. She thought about the man who had stopped to help when he could have easily ridden past. And she thought about all the moments that had come after the laughter and tears, the struggles and triumphs, the quiet evenings and joyful celebrations. "I would do it all again," she said suddenly, turning to look at Ethan. "Every hard moment, every painful day, I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." Ethan took both her hands in his blue eyes as clear and honest as they had been the day he had given her water and shade. "I found more than a woman dying in the desert that day," he said. "I found my purpose, my home, my heart. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Vance. And you saved my life in every way a person can be saved," Olivia replied. They kissed there in the desert, the same desert that had nearly claimed Olivia's life, but had instead given her everything she had ever wanted. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly blue, and around them, the land they had worked and loved together spread out in all directions. It was a good life, a full life, a life built on love and trust and the simple act of one person choosing to help another in their darkest moment. Years later, when they were both old and gray but still deeply in love, they would sit on their porch in the evenings and tell their grandchildren the story of how they met. The children never tired of hearing it, begging for the tale again and again. And Olivia and Ethan never tired of telling it because it was their story, the foundation of everything they had built together. The desert had been cruel to Olivia, had taken her father, and nearly taken her life. But it had also been kind, delivering her into the arms of a man who would love her unconditionally for the rest of their lives. And in the end, that kindness had transformed everything, turning a story that began with death and betrayal into one of hope, healing, and enduring love. When Ethan Vance passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1912, at the age of 63, Olivia was holding his hand, just as she had held it on so many nights over their 34 years of marriage. And when Olivia followed him 2 years later, she died surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them testament to the love story that had begun in the most unlikely of places. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a sky as vast and blue as the one that had witnessed their first meeting. And though their story had ended, the love they had shared continued on in the family they had created, in the land they had tended, and in the countless lives they had touched with their kindness, their courage, and their unwavering devotion to each other. The desert remembered them, as it remembers all who brave its harsh beauty. And sometimes, on clear autumn days when the light hits just right, visitors to that memorial stone might feel a presence there, a whisper of the love that had bloomed in such an unlikely place, reminding them that even in our darkest moments, salvation can arrive in the most unexpected forms, and that one act of mercy can change not just a single life, but generations to come.